resume recording. And so we talked about the passage into the underworld. Last time we talked about having your heart measured against a feather and all of that sort of thing. Gives us an insight to their belief system, gives an insight to what's important in their culture. And so that's really kind of the underlying theme, especially for all of ancient art. You know what's important to it. You know, looking at all of the prehistoric art, what we're finding, we don't know exactly what everything means, but we did find out that there were two things that seem to be recurring. One is hunting animals. That was huge. Every place you go around the globe, we're finding big animals, big game hunting, food, sustenance. The other thing that we're finding is signs or indications that fertility is a paramount concern. So we know that those two things. And then we move through Mesopotamia. We see the rise of civilization. Now we enter into the historical period. We have history. We have writing. We see that they build temples. We see that things such as, not so much about hunting, although we did see the king hunting lions, it's really about agriculture. Most of the animals you see have everything to do with being livestock, domesticated, if you will, and agriculture. And we also see a lot of images relating to gods. Gods are going to be paramount for this whole class. We don't get away from that, be it prehistoric, early history, medieval times. When we finish out the course, we'll be in the medieval period, and the major architectural and artistic accomplishments, at least in Europe, during the Middle Ages, are cathedrals and the sculptures and the stained glass that go with it, and that is religion. And in that case, religion pretty much dominates the politics and the military too, because we'll talk about that later. But, you know, we find out in Egypt, we see there's a mass of wealth, there's a mass of power, and at least for a while here, we see that there are really the same kinds of priorities. We see a lot of stuff going on with animals. We see the domesticated animals, we see the agriculture, we see a lot about the pharaohs themselves. And in part, this is a merger. It's happened in Mesopotamia as well. But it's where the physical, political, military leaders of the physical world are also the ones who are considered to be gods as well. So all of these things, was it in this class somebody asked me about this being propaganda, everything? Yes. That was such a good question, because it is propaganda, and it is meant to demonstrate and to celebrate this power of the gods. And so I want to start with this. I'm probably not going to give Egypt as much airtime as it deserves. Of course, you could do a whole semester on Egypt. And once you did a whole semester, you could get an entire PhD in Egyptology. And I know somebody that has that degree, by the way. And so you can spend a lifetime, and it would be a very worthwhile and prosperous lifetime too, because the civilization was around in its as an empire for like 3,000 years. And we've only scratched the surface. And on top of which, all of the tools that we use in science today, science and medicine, DNA, for example, we're finding testable DNA in some of the mummies and the other bodies that we are extracting. We're discovering, pulling them out of the tombs, using all of the tools of medicine, CAT scans, MRIs, etc. All of this is employed for archaeology's sake, to find out about our past. And that's just the surface of it. I mean, we got satellite photography that shows us where there were civilizations where you can't even see when you're on the ground. It's not noticeable, but from a satellite image, what are all of these marks out here in the middle of the desert? They seem to be placed. Some of you who did Stonehenge are facing or would be writing about some of those same issues. Ground penetrating radar, metal detectors. I'm really curious about your essays. I just gave it a glance, but it looked like some of you actually touched upon some of those issues. And you could spend your whole life studying Stonehenge, by the way, too. And there's a lot there that is unanswerable. And so anyway, I say that pre-dynastic Egypt. See, this is 5,000 years ago. And we call it pre-dynastic in part because we, in so many ways, we don't know the chain of succession. We don't know how far the empire extended. And when you have a dynasty, it implies a couple of things. One is that you have reign, power, authority over a large piece of land, a large area, and a large population. Just say, we talk about even in modern times, somewhat modern times, we talk about a kingdom. Well, a kingdom is kind of small. It's just within a very narrow scope. A dynasty extends over a broad area and over a large population. And so that's kind of what that pre-dynasty means. And secondly, I want to say this, is that we may be changing that. The more we find out, we may be looking at this stuff as not pre-dynastic, but early dynastic. And so I wanted to show you this. This is the back of the palette of King Narmer. So we know, we're talking about a dynasty, but we do know Narmer had a kingdom. And looks like he's not particularly, looks like he does not tolerate fools well. He's got this guy by the hair and he got a club. Looks like he's vanquishing an enemy. just saying. We don't really know that, and we're not seeing much in the way of hieroglyphics at this point. But we do see the images, and we see this attendant, and again, the scale. We know this is King Narmer because he's the biggest. Another aspect of royalty, kings and pharaohs, is that they wear their beard differently than what we see in Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, we saw the braided beards. In Egypt, we'll see something of a cylindrical beard. It's as though they tied it all together, and oftentimes they put it in a cylinder of some sort and had that decorated as well. But anyway, this is pre-dynastic Egypt, and here's the front side of it. So I want to ask you this question. What is a palette? Got art students in this class, I know. What is a palette? Not talking, eh? We have way. Palette. How many painters we have in here? Xander.
Well, an art palette is something you mix colors on.
That is exactly right.
I don't know if it, I can't really translate it over to this, but maybe this is just shows a bunch of symbols that are being used could be used for other artifacts or other stuff they would build, and they would just have these things to like have these and
No, actually, you hit it right on the head. I was looking for the obvious answer here. And something to mix color on, paint, use a palette. Well, that's what this center part is. And it's not paint, it's makeup. And so you see all of these Egyptian, or I should say, when you see Egyptian statues, because we'll see some, and we see that the royalty oftentimes will have makeup, painted faces. Their face is not the same color as their hands, so to speak. And so, yeah, that is exactly what this is. This is the royal makeup palette. It's not that big. I mean, it's like 25 inches. And all of the symbols that Xander alluded to here, this is all demonstration of the domain. This is to kind of prove that this is something that belongs to somebody who has rule over all of these areas. An interesting point here, I think, is this. We talked about lions in this class already. This is, we don't know that this is an actual naturalistic depiction, but they're okay with stylizing, exaggerating features. We see these lions and they're facing each other, and their necks form the center part where the pigment was prepared. And so anyway, talking about this is an early mastaba tomb. And one of the things that we find throughout Egyptian history is that they went to great lengths to memorialize their dead pharaohs. And so that becomes an essential part of Egyptian architecture. And it's an essential part of what we still have today. Bottom line, yes.
Weren't pharaohs considered to be gods?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And that stays the same until we get to Akhenaten. And he's the guy, and we'll talk about him a little bit today. He's the guy that says, oh, no, I'm the Pharaoh, but I'm not God. The Son is God. And hence his name, Sun God. Anyway, but yeah, absolutely. They believed they were gods, and that's why they were treated so exceptionally as exceptionally important figures. And so this is an early mastaba tomb, and this is just a drawing because, oh, I don't have these are basically buried under the sands. I was talking about this the other day too, that one of the problems, one of the obstacles, one of the hurdles about uncovering Egyptian artifacts, buildings, tombs, mummies, anything, pottery, is that the desert takes over. The desert, the Sahara Desert. I'm going to run back here just a little bit and show you this map, because this is really, I think, an essential part of understanding what was going on. You see, this is the Egyptian Empire. This is ancient Egypt. And bottom line, look how far this extends. And this is the New Kingdom. And it goes like halfway to Algeria. And it goes all the way to the Red Sea. And we believe that at the time, this was more well vegetated. It's mostly desert today. And in today's world, you can go on Google Earth and see this. The extent of green arable land is really just a strip along the Nile. But 3,500 years ago, we believe this was all lush, forested, green, be able to grow crops out here. And so that's why it extends so much, so far. But over time, this is my point, that Sahara Desert is growing. It's still growing today. And it's grown, and it grows all the way to the Nile, and actually has kind of grown over to the Red Sea to that extent. And it's also growing southward too. Sudan is losing land every year to the expansion of the Sahara. And so anyway, but at the time, this was really quite a big area. And so anyway, what happens over time is when that desert eats up these places, they get buried in sand, and they get buried in tens of feet of sand. I mean, like really deep. And so anyway, this is kind of a preview of what's going to happen with the pyramids, though. We got the chapel. We got a place to worship the dead king, Pharaoh. We also got a false door, and they were really kind of big on that. Yes.
Yeah, because Raiders, the Tomb Raiders are a huge thing. I mean, that's the huge issue that archaeologists had being up on this stuff, because they just opened some chambers and they put nothing in there because people were already in there and took everything out of there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they have false doors, and they have doors that have been found. This is an interesting, I'm going to show you this because this goes right to your point. Xander's absolutely correct. What we're talking about is a period of millennia. and tomb raiders. This section of the Pyramid of Khufu. Look at number 2, thieves' tunnels. So as we're finding how these things were built, we're also finding those same tunnels that Xander was talking about. And so we see that tunnel that goes into leads into the Grand Gallery. And so back up a little bit to kind of explain some of this. And so this is the 3rd dynasty. So it's really old, kingdom. And this is what we think this looks like based on what we've dug up. And so first tombs had sloped walls. They were thick. And you see, all of this stuff is like buried really deep inside this tomb. And so, but as we discussed, the pharaohs believed in afterlife. And a pharaoh, when he died, would be buried with everything he needed in the afterlife. And so that's the kind of treasure that Xander's talking about. These guys would, over the centuries, come in, and if they could find a tomb, they could get past the false doors and all of this other stuff that was meant to deter thieves. They could haul out of there almost immeasurable wealth by today's standards. It would be jewels, it would be gold, there would be things that would be basically utility things, like perhaps a pack animal, like a donkey, to pull the cart or the chariot that they would leave in there. They would leave weapons in there so the pharaoh could defend himself. We'd see swords and spears and things like that. They would put toys in there or other things for amusement purposes. Anything, tons of food, everything that you could possibly need. The pharaoh's wealth was buried with him. I got to add to that, though, a lot of times when they buried food with the pharaohs, they would put like grain in there, you know, like maybe tons of wheat or rice or something. And over time, those grains develop mold and they become extremely toxic. And so one of the things that is kind of a poetic justice, revenge of the pharaohs would be that these thieves would get poisoned by breathing all of this toxic mold. And if you want to look, they still actually do this today. There's a poison that's probably one of the most toxic substances to human beings. It's called ricin, and it's grown on beans, actually. Bottom line is that was revenge in a kind of poetic sort of way. What that fueled over the centuries is kind of a myth that these tomb raiders would go all the way deep into these pharaohs' tombs, rob it, and then mysteriously die from those toxins. And so what did that become? That became the curse of the pharaoh. The pharaoh from the afterlife got even. And so anyway, that kind of is another point I'd like to make about this. And that is whenever, I'll be saying this a lot, whenever there's a hole in the knowledge base, and right now we're at an all-time high or a modern high in what we know about ancient culture, because we put a lot of energy into it. A lot of very smart, bright people have been working on this really seriously for about the last 150 years. It became its own practice, its own discipline. But bottom line is this: we still don't know everything. And a lot of times when there's a hole in the knowledge base, people will be glad to fill it up with disinformation, with all kinds of things. We see that happen today. Pardon?
Do they make conclusions?
They make conclusions, exactly. One of the things that keeps recurring, and you'll find this about Egyptian culture, is that it is surprisingly, astonishingly advanced in so many ways, that there is a whole industry out there about ancient alien theories and stuff like that, that there's no possible way that human beings could be this smart to develop this level of sophisticated society standard.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You could argue that because there is a lot of discontinuation, especially when it comes to technology. For example, the Roman Empire. I mean, they had everything, and then all of a sudden we go to medieval times,
dark ages, as they say,
like Renaissance, Renaissance, mid 1500s, and all of a sudden all that technology is completely out of the window. They're back to all nasty and stuff.
Yes, it can go away, and it can go away really within a generation. If you have a whole generation that doesn't understand the advances, you got a whole generation, let's just say, a whole generation of people who are illiterate. Then after that, books are useless. And so, yeah, it can happen quickly. And it did on a number of occasions, like Xander said. And so, anyway, this is kind of the early burial tombs. And it became, this is Imhotep. And this is still pretty early. It's the third dynasty. And he made this one on top the other. And this is called a stepped pyramid, as obvious. You can see that the desert had reclaimed a lot of this. There's still a lot of sand that's on top of this. But one of the things that happens too, not so much that they're tomb raiders, but if you're an Egyptian and you live a couple of thousand years after this, want to build a house, don't have bricks. A lot of people go out and they forage these places. They go out and haul the bricks away to make new buildings. We still actually do that today. And you can see where they're knocking down buildings in St. Louis. And people are coming by and they're hauling bricks away. Oh, let me decline. And so anyway, this is the development of these tombs. And here is the whole complex as we believe it existed at scene number 2, stepped pyramid. And this is kind of an interesting thing too. These are columns. It's a corridor, columnar entrance corridor to the mortuary precinct, which is that complex that I just showed you. But look at how they did this. These are stones stacked one upon the other. Basically, those cylindrical, and they have what we call here, this is those lines that go up and down. That's called fluting, by the way. And we see that. That'll persist for many, many centuries in architecture. But the idea that they could cut rock and put it together like this is really pretty astonishing. We take a look at it and say, how could they even move these things? Of course, you guys that wrote about Stonehenge, that's still an open question about Stonehenge too. How do ancient people actually move such massive objects? And so here we see that they've cut bricks. They were actually excellent. What we call them masons, stone cutters. They were, and the fit is quite remarkable. And the fact that they survived for over 4,500 years in what is a pretty difficult climate. Amazing. And so here's the pyramids. This is still Old Kingdom. It's the 4th dynasty. And you see all of this happen in geologic time. It happened in the blink of an eye. But it's really like a couple of hundred years. Sandy gets it. Oh, okay. And so this is the aerial view of the 4th dynasty pyramids. And we know that it's Menkaure, Khafra, and Khufu. And so a lot has been made of these pyramids over the years. And they are one of the great architectural wonders of the ancient world and really probably all of human history. Yes, sir.
Are they the only ones like? Yes. Because I know, like, for example, like the hanging gardens of Babylon, like those are like hanging colossus and Radas and stuff like that. Like all that is not said. The Menkaure of Alexandria, which is also in Egypt, but like I feel like that's the only one.
I think that's correct. Absolutely. There were 7 wonders of the ancient world. And the Colossus of Rhodes, that would have been really something. It's a big statue that it's like got 1 foot on one island and another on the other. The Rhodes, it's in Greece. But yeah, what Xander's talking about is that there were 7 wonders of the ancient world. And this is the only one that survives. And again, there's still kind of a big hole in what we know. There's that diagram I was showing you a while ago. Thebes tunnels, that's what we know of. Number 5, the King's Chamber, pretty much dead center. We see number 9, these are air shafts, and it's got a question mark under it, by it. And part of that question mark is that's a hole in our information. We don't know that was the purpose of these. They open up on the surface, and if you stand in here in the King's Chamber, these actually point to stars and particular constellations, which has given rise over the centuries that it's sort of like a telescope that's pointing to the origin of the aliens that came down and created this society. There's also some other theories about the spacing and the size resembles a particular constellation. Don't ask me which, but that is in itself significant. Yeah.
Also, with like the dimensions of the pyramid, isn't that something like the I don't know, I think it's like maybe like the longitude or latitude of like where they're at or where they're facing.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are coincidence that are yeah, and people that are what they call ancient alien theorists would point to that as there's too many of these coincidences too. And I want to say something here too. Talking about this, I have some friends who are Egyptologists. They would probably take me outside and beat me up if they caught me talking about this stuff here, because they are adamant that that's all just nonsense. And I think that you'll find that most academic scholars feel that way. I bring it up because I think that those stories are part of modern day culture. And in some, in some way, maybe these theories will be debunked. But there are some bright people that is part of what's circulating. You won't find it in academia, and a lot of serious scholars will, like I say, don't kill me or anything. I always hear these stories from aliens. Can you believe it? They watch the History Channel. Bottom line. But at any rate, that's why I prefaced all this with there's a hole here. And there are some coincidences that are not explained yet, and maybe they'll just die as coincidental, maybe. But we do know that they were astronomers. We do know that they figured out, that's what we were talking about that with you guys that wrote about Stonehenge, know how that was a calendar. The Egyptians were like way ahead on that score. And so they had an interest in the cosmos. And so, yeah, but you can see these are like 4,500 years old. It's remarkable that they're even still here. And so this is a model of the complex. And you see over here, number 5, the Great Sphinx, which is the other attraction. I love this picture, partly because it shows people. This is like one of the world's most visited tourist attractions, period. People from all over the globe come to see the pyramids and Sphinx and stuff. And so you see this guy here, you can see how big the Sphinx is. And the Sphinx, again, a guardian, a lion with the head of a human. We're not exactly sure who this is, but he's got a pharaoh's headdress on, and he's got this. This is a royal symbol, by the way. You'll find this on a lot of pharaohs. It's an asp. It's a deadly snake. And you'll find that on a lot of pharaoh statues and death masks and stuff of pharaohs. And so bottom line is that he is the guardian. And when a lot of this was discovered, I can tell you, when it was discovered by Western people, it was up to around this level that it was all still covered in sand. And what they're finding underneath here is that there were rooms and other things going on down there. They haven't fully excavated all of this, but you see, that's why there's such a big dig around the Sphinx, because they're still uncovering things. But the Sphinx, being the guardian of the pyramids, unquestioned, and the nose. You see, what happens through the millennia is that a lot of ancient treasures get destroyed by invading armies, or people who have a different belief system and think that all of this should go away, that all of this Egyptian stuff is evil and must be destroyed. I think the educated and modern view is, no, this is our treasure. This is who we are as human beings. But at any rate, yeah, the scale. The other thing I wanted to say too is that we believe that the tops of these pyramids are kind of an indication of what they must have looked like when they were built. And that is that they have another level of polished stone over the top. We think that they were probably very well polished. They were probably white in appearance with some white granite or something of the sort, some kind of sedimentary hard rock that was, and you saw exactly what we saw, how accomplished they were as stone cutters. We think that this was probably this truly. And so I want to add a little something to the story of the pyramids, kind of more recent. And that is, who built them? We know the Egyptians built them, but you know, in a lot of ways we don't know how. But all around here, they're excavating. And one of the things that they discovered within the last 5 years or so was an encampment. And it was a workers' encampment. And in that place, they found all kinds of stuff. It had been believed for centuries, even when I grew up, it was all accepted that the pyramids were built by slaves, that they captured people from Sudan, from the Middle East. Some of that's actually even fed by the story of Moses, let my people go, and how Ramses captured and enslaved the Jewish people, and so on and so on. And so we got stories, we got genuine evidence that slaves and slavery was, at least for a while, part of the culture, but not here. They found that in those encampments, they're finding all kinds of things, that these guys were paid. We're finding records that those workers were actually paid. And they lived there. They brought their families with them. There was an infirmary or a hospital there for the wounded or the injured or the sick. And one of the things that they did back then, this is like kind of cool. Miller time. I mean, they actually brewed beer and they paid some of these workers, at least in part, in beer. Can you imagine? So anyway, I bring that up because I think, personally, this is evidence of the society that is actually civilized. Pardon?
Been more advanced than we thought.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you're treating your workers well, that's not backwards. That's advanced. Absolutely. And so anyway, yeah, this is, and they're finding more, like I say, all the time. And so Khafre, this is one of the pharaohs who was entombed in the pyramids. And you see, this is still fourth dynasty. It's pretty old. This is kind of a cool. This is kind of tore up, but we're actually coming up to the 18th dynasty. So we were talking about third, fourth, fifth dynasties, and then we move up 1,000 years to the 18th dynasty. But at any rate, you see the artwork, the style is pretty much the same. And people are basically portrayed in profile. And this is, to me, it's just really so cool because it is sculptors at work. And so you don't see a slave driver. You don't see these were craftspeople. They were skilled artists. And so this goes back to the fourth dynasty. You can see this is the basic pose that you find of a pharaoh. And typically 1 foot forward, we think that that symbolizes that basically, how I said it, that the pharaoh is moving forward, that he is a person of action going in the right direction. He's got all of the accoutrements of being the pharaoh, including the headdress and so on. And another set of statues painted limestone and from their mastaba, from their tomb. And a seated scribe from Saqqara. Fourth dynasty, found in the tomb. Bottom line, that's what I was saying. Sometimes they would actually bury the people that they needed. Sometimes they made statues of the attendants, whoever the pharaoh would need. And this is certainly somebody that you would need. The pharaoh has a scribe all of the time because everything he says is important. Wants a written record, wants to have everything. His word is law. And so anyway, this was kind of an interesting find. Partly when it was found, it kind of made a splash because it was an ordinary person, much more ordinary than a prince or a pharaoh's wife or a pharaoh. So, and the other part is the naturalism. It's very natural. You could probably, if you saw this guy walking down the hall, you probably recognize it because all he's wearing is a white. But even if he was dressed, you would probably recognize this. This is an actual human being, recognizable. And so anyway, I want to kind of move up a little bit because see, this is all still around the pyramids and the mastaba tombs and the pyramids of Egypt. And this is all in the north by Giza, Saqqara, and so on. And so, and again, as I said, you memorialize the things that are important. In this case, they're herding goats and they're moving the cattle across a canal, which kind of tells us a couple of things. One is that they have canals, man-made waterways, human-made waterways, and they're typically used to irrigate crops. And so that's why, and they have their own convention here. You see that line, that's the water level, and they have these kind of curly hue lines that mess up exactly how you see the legs of the humans and the animal, of the cattle. So they have conventions. There's a lot of conventions that they invented and kept for thousands of years, but kind of got lost in time. I don't have a slide of this, but I'll tell you about it. Say this, something that looks like this. See if I can get that on my. You guys are wrong. Bottom line. See what's going on here? You can find these on Google. This is a pool. It's a rectangular pool, a swimming pool, if you will. But the way they depict it is that if you're in the pool and you're looking that way, you see this person going to jump in, you see the trees. If you're looking this way, that's how you see it. If you're standing here, you see the horse and the two trees. Follow me? And so anyway, a lot of things that look odd in Egyptian art really kind of make sense if you kind of divest yourself of all of this stuff. Western conventions, modern Western conventions of linear perspective and stuff like that. But at any rate, that's that. And so, Senusret, there's that asp I was talking about. Royal headdress. Much more natural. This is somebody that you recognize, I think. See where this is at? It's in Kansas City. Kansas City has a lot of Egyptian stuff. As a matter of fact, you find Egyptian art all over the world. Egypt would love to have all of this stuff repatriated. What do I mean by that? I mean that they would like to have their stuff back in Egypt. That's not happening yet. And so what happens by the 12th dynasty? And this is huge. I showed you the corridor of the Mastaba tomb. And I showed you the columns that were cut out of stone and assembled in that corridor. What they start doing by the 12th dynasty, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, all of these newer dynasties, they start just carving into what the book calls live rock, which means that it's rock that's in situ. It's right there. It's like in the ground. And there's a lot of it in Egypt. And so the rock cut tomb of Amen-Emhet, 12th dynasty. But see, this is not assembled. This is actually cut into the side of a mountain, of a rock place. And you see, every bit is elaborate. They painted it, and they'll have doorways, and they'll have other rooms in here, just like before. And here is the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, 18th dynasty. This is all cut out of rock. Amazing. And I want to end this for a second. And I want to show you another PowerPoint that I found. I gotta make sure I've got the right screen share here. This is stuff that's not particularly in the book, but and slideshow from the beginning. And to make sure that I still have the right share, we're good. All right, the Rosetta Stone. Learn languages at home on your own time. Get Rosetta Stone. Used to be on CDs. It's probably streaming now, I'm sure. Rosetta Stone. This is significant. This is so huge. I can't even. I'll try to explain. Significant. Egypt was shrouded in mystery. As Andrew was saying, you can lose your culture and everything about it in a short period of time. And that's really what happened to Egypt. We knew Egypt was there, but you know, back in the couple of 100 years, 300 years before the Common Era, Egypt sustained a lot of invasions, and they became part of the Hittite Empire. They became part of the Greek Empire, and we're talking about the library, the lighthouse at Alexandria, which was Greek, which was named after Alexander the Great. Roman, for centuries, and kind of lost. And so their culture just got ate up by the sands. It was a mysterious place. We knew it was ancient civilization there. Late 18th century, the late 1700s. Very ambitious French general named Napoleon decided to conquer, wanted to be like Alexander the Great and conquer much of the known world. Actually went, did North Africa, did the Middle East, tried to go all the way to Moscow, didn't quite make it, but covered much of Europe. Napoleon, the conqueror. Well, when they came through Egypt, they found this thing called the Rosetta Stone, and the Rosetta Stone is now a metaphor for unlocking a code or a new language that you can learn in your spare time. What this is, and there's a kind of a close-up here in this long vertical section of 3 images. They found this, and they had the top part, which was old Egyptian. They found this to be later Egyptian, and the bottom was in Greek. You see, it's 196 BCE is when the Greeks ruled over Egypt. And so this is like basically a warning thing. It's like a travel advisory. It's like, if you come into this town, you know, you gotta behave yourself, you know, and stuff like that. This is territory of the Greek government, and stuff like that. You know, if it were today, it would be say something like speed limit 30, radar enforced or something. You know, it's basically a warning, and it is what we would call a stela, a big piece of stone that has a message. Usually a stela memorializes something, but in this case, you know, you don't have LED signs, you don't even have side painters. You got masons. They'll carve in your message. But what the significance of this was, they hold us back to France, and they had people that knew Old Greek. And Greek is a language that had evolved, but there was enough people still around, scholars that could read Greek. And then they figured out that this actually says the same thing in all three registers, if you will. Old Egypt, New Egypt, and Greek. And so from this, that they knew this is what this said, they figured out that this said the same thing, and the top register said the same thing as well. So it was how they discovered, how they figured out how to read all of the inscriptions on all of the tombs and the statues and all of the stuff that they were finding around from Egypt. So I got tons of stuff. I got thousands of years of stuff to talk to you. But it's getting. Do you have any questions or comments? Okay, we're going to look at this a little bit more. I got the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids. This is that same outcrop. Anyway, I'll show you all this stuff later. We'll talk about that. Got a nice day out there. You guys stay safe. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you Monday. We'll talk about another couple of thousand in 1 hour.